Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 569. With 2025 in the books, I will be interviewing a handful of domain investors in the coming months to ask them how the year was for them. I find this type of interview very insightful as they let you dig into other investor strategies, understand pricing, and improve your own domain investing prowess. Today, I'm talking with Doron Vermaat. Doron is a longtime domain investor and co-founder of the domain sales platform Efty. If there's one takeaway from today's interview, I think it should be that there are many ways to make good money in domain investing outside of .com. Doron sold 38 names this past year for over $350,000 in total revenue, and .com accounted for less than $10,000 of that. Doron also shares some insights from the Efty platform. Stay tuned for that interview shortly. Now, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Salve.com and its for sale pages. Make your resolution this year to save on domain commissions. When you sell your domains through Salve Landers, you pay just a 4% commission. It's easy to list and they have fast payouts. Learn more and start selling your domains at Salve. Go to salve.com/DNW/sell. That's SAV.com/DNW/sell. Now let's talk about some news in the domain business from the past week. 2025 was a mixed year for publicly traded domain name companies, as I detailed in a post on January 7th. NameSilo was a big winner, with the company's shares approximately tripling in price. Tucow's shares also rose this year, up 31%. However, the previous year they were down 37%. It will be an interesting year for Tucow's as they're planning to sell their fiber to the home business. European registrar and hosting conglomerate Ionos had shares rise 21%. In Q4, it announced it was trying to sell Cedo. VeriSign also had an up year. Shares were up 17%. But two other companies had down years. GoDaddy shares were off 37% in the year, coming after 2024 when its shares jumped 86%. And Team Internet Group shares lost about half of their value. It is struggling in the wake of AdSense for domain shutting down, and it laid off a lot of employees last year. The application window for new top-level domains opens April 30th of this year. I imagine most DNW podcast listeners who are interested in applying are well down the path. But if not, ICANN is holding a couple of webinars this month to help you. On January 20th, there's a webinar for people new to the domain business and new top-level domains. A more interesting webinar will be on January 27th, when ICANN will walk through the application process in its many stages. You can get links to register for these webinars in a post on Domain Name Wire on January 8th. Of course, these webinars are just the tip of the iceberg. ICANN has already published a 440-page guidebook for applicants, so get out your reading glasses. Some other stories to check out on Domain Name Wire last week. I wrote about how the declining US dollar impacts the domain business, as well as some recent UDRP decisions. Visit domainnamewire.com to read these stories. And a final note before we chat with Doron, this week is the Internet Commerce Association meeting in Las Vegas. If you want to make a last-minute trip to Vegas, head on over to ica.vegas where you can buy tickets. The last-minute price is $799, but all attendees get a $500 credit at Unstoppable Domains. Plus, I'd say that $799, the event is worth every penny. I look forward to seeing many of you there, including today's guest. Now, let's chat with Doron Vermaat. My guest this week is Doron Vermaat. He is a domain investor and also co-founder of Efty. Doron, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about how your 2025 went, and then we'll also get some data on Efty as well, because you sell a lot of names yourself, but you also have this view, right, from running Efty, which is a domain sales platform. You also have Efty Pay now as well. So we'll get into some of those details later. But first of all, how was your 2025 as a domain investor?
It was good. I wouldn't say it was crazy, but I wouldn't say it's bad either. For me, the big surprise was like the previous year, I was really focused on selling because we just closed on our first home. and I had to take out quite a significant sum of money to pay as a down payment. So my focus throughout the year was really on selling, selling, selling. And normally you do that as well, but you replace names. So if you sell a great name, you use most of the proceeds to buy multiple names, just like it. But I didn't do much of that during 2024. So when you stop compounding like that, usually you'll see that in the numbers. But I was quite happy to see, although my year wasn't as good as the previous 2 or 3 years, it was still, I'd say, very good. I had a total sales volume of just over 385,000. And I sold like a total of 38 domain names throughout the year, which is a little less domain names than I sell normally. But the average sales price was up significantly. So the average sales price was 9,436.
Okay.
Which is quite a bit higher than in previous years. That's great. Yeah.
Let's kind of right size here on, that's fantastic numbers, but help me understand at the top level, how many domains do you own?
Looking at the number I had at the beginning of the year versus the end of the year, it's around 1,600. That number has been fairly consistent over the years. Yeah.
Okay. That's a strong sell-through rate. I think most people aim 1 to 2%, but end up closer to 1%, but you're over 2% there.
Yes, it's 2.4% sell-through rate. And what's interesting, because my portfolio is very diverse. I own a good number of .coms, but I also own a lot of alternative extensions. And it's quite interesting to see the difference in the sell-through rate. For example, like a .ai or .co compared to some of the other ones. Like in previous years, .io used to be my cash cow, so to speak. It had always had the highest sell-through rate. And last year, I really saw that drop quite a bit. It was around, I wrote it down somewhere. Let's see. It was 2.3% for .io, which is still average if you look at the total portfolio. But if you look at, for example, .ai domains, I had a much higher STR in my portfolio. So it was around 5.5 or 5.8%. Which is really good.
Let's dig into that portfolio because, again, your portfolio is very diverse. You do have a good number of comms here. So some of the numbers you sent me, it looks like about 600 of the 1,600 names are com. But last year, how many of those did you sell?
Yeah, so that was the big surprise to me. I only sold 2 .com domains last year, which is significantly less than previous years. And normally you would think, .com is not selling anymore, but it's just, that's really an outlier year for me. I mean, I did turn down some significant offers on some of my best .com domains, but I was surprised that I only managed to move 2 out of almost 600. So it had a terrible STR for me last year. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, looking at the other domains you sent me, so .ai, .co, .io, .vc are all fairly big in your portfolio here. You mentioned .io of a sell-through rate kind of near your average here, 2.3 or so. So you sold 10 out of, I guess right now you have 431 names. And so that, as you mentioned, it kind of went down a little bit. And your average sale wasn't huge on those either, right, on the .io last year?
Correct. So normally I would have 1 or 2 outlier sales in .io. So previous year I sold Mind.io. It was like a high 5-figure sale. I've sold names like Seal.io, Bling.io. They were all like, 70, 80, 90K sales, but I didn't have any of those. So all the .ios I sold last year, they were like 4,995 or 2,995 kind of names. So really around that medium sales price. Yeah.
Got it. And then, do you think, so on .ai, you sold 11 names last year. You have 229. We all know .ai is going gangbusters, but do you think some of that was people that maybe would have looked at an IO before instead looking at AI?
Yeah, I think so. I think .ai definitely took away some of the market share from .io. A lot of tech startup or technology companies who would have previously chosen the .io last year definitely were looking for a .ai name. I think over time that will reverse. My prediction for this year is that lots of startups are being priced out of .ai domains because there's just less, auction prices are going up. There's just less inventory. A lot of the good names are taken, developed, being used. And with these high prices, I think you will see some of these startups looking for alternatives again. Plus, what you hear a lot in the market is the prediction that every company will be using AI within the next year or two. So having a domain
why would
name,
they need a .ai? Yeah,
exactly. So that will drive some demand again for extensions that are more generic. And I think for technology, for startups, .io is really a good generic extension. Personally, I'm still bullish on it, but with the high renewal fees for .io,
they're going up again this month.
Yeah, every year they go up. They used to be, I don't know, $25. I think now they're already 49. Or so for me, when I looked at how much I've sold versus how much I've paid in renewal fees, I think I've sold around 40, 45K in .ios, but I've paid 30K in renewal fees. So I'm definitely looking to reduce my holding in .io and hold the great names, but hold a bit, perhaps less of the two-worders or those kind of names.
Yeah, another interesting thing about your sales this past year is .co was actually, I think from a sell-through rate percentage was your best. So 8 out of 136. So that's around 6%. What do you make of that? That kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I just don't own that many .co. It's less than 200, but they do perform just fine for me. And they had the highest sell-through rate this year. Not sure what to make of it, but it's been an extension that's way past its trend. It's not trendy at all anymore, .co, but it's very much an extension that is used and liked by many, and there's just still plenty of demand. It's just not the hottest startups who go for .co, but it is the e-commerce companies or like the coaching businesses or more like mom and pop shops, who choose the .co because it's just like a kind of like a global. It has global appeal. It's like a short version of .com maybe. We've also seen it with Efty. It's definitely up in top 3 or 4 alternative extensions in terms of the number of sales. But it's also all about pricing. You price them really high. Obviously, your STR is going to drop.
Sure. But your top sale, I believe, in 2025 was a .co, right?
Yeah, but so my number one sale last year was brain.co. But looking at that name, I think it's sold because of the SLD, the word brain, not so much because of the .co extension. But yeah, that was my number one sale.
And that was at about almost 85K, right?
Yeah, so it sold for $83,750, making it my highest sale for 2025. And I think my biggest .co sale, to be honest. Yeah.
It must have been. When I look at that, what's interesting to me about it, brain.co, I went to the website and the headline here is AI for the most important institutions. So it is an AI company that chose to use .co here. I imagine brain.ai, I haven't looked it up, but I imagine that would be very expensive to acquire. But it's also interesting, you said, the SLD here, Brain, which is obviously good, but this company is actually called Brain Co. Brain Space CO. I can see why they would have potentially preferred this over other options.
It makes total sense. And that's one thing you do see with .co is that for companies, you quite often see a brand name and then co because it stands for company, or that can definitely help drive sales, I think, within this particular extension. What helped, of course, Brainco, the company who bought it, is backed by Jared Kushner. You know, what's he? The relative or no, the husband of Trump's daughter?
Yeah, one of Trump's daughters. Yeah.
It's a company that raised, I think they raised 30 million or so. But they just outright bought a domain. So it was just like a buy it now sale directly through the Efty.com marketplace. So for me, that was also the big surprise, because looking back at most of my outlier sales, they were negotiated. So I anchor high, usually a good offer comes in, and then I try to meet in the middle. But this was just like, hey, this domain just got bought, payment came in.
It always
done deal. Yeah.
Yeah. It always surprises me because, I see others like that or hear about them from people, where even sometimes at six figures, they just buy now. And I think what you pointed out here, look, this company's got $30 million. They certainly don't want to open a negotiation and then have you realize who it is and try to raise the price, and it's like, let's just get it
Exactly.
done.
Yeah, no, that is exactly why companies just bin it, I think, because the moment they do negotiate, then, there's obviously a chance that an investor might actually up the price instead of drop it.
It's funny, right before this call, most of my sales are in the 2 to 5K range, and I just received an offer on Cito for a name that currently have a bin of about 5,000 on Afternic, and I went and looked at it and just realized, wow, this name, it's like I don't reevaluate names that frequently.
On the price, right?
Yeah, I was like, holy cow, this is registered in 22 extensions, and a bunch of them are in use. So now first thing I did was go raise the price at Afternic. So
we know this happens a lot. And it's also at Efty, buyers, when they go for checkout, they can jump into a chat or, they can speak with us. And quite often people, they ask advice or they want to negotiate on like a name. And if it's like a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 name, we usually advise against it unless people are really stretched. Like if you really only have 1,500 and you can't pay 4K, yes, go for it. But if you don't want to risk losing out on owning that name, if it's really important, we usually just advise buyers to just purchase it instead of trying to...
Don't take that risk. Yeah. Over $1,000 or so.
Depending on your situation, of course, if it's, there are obviously buyers who really, they're completely stressed and they really can't pay price, but they can pay 2K instead of 4, then go for it. If you have the funds, then usually, I think it makes more sense as a buyer to just pay the price.
You said average sale 9.4K. I think you mistakenly said at the top 385,000 in sales. It was actually 358 there.
358,
yeah. If I'm doing the math, which, it's still right in the same range. But your median sale was around $5,000. So I think this is important to point out that, you have sales like Brain.co that lift everything up really high, right? So typically you're selling a domain, median is half or below, half or above. So typically you're selling them for about $5,000.
Yeah, that's the sweet spot. I'd say probably 70% of the names that I hold are priced within that range. I would say between $2,000 to $7,000.
Let's talk about some of your other specific sales on the AI front. What was your top .ai?
Can't really share the top one.
Okay,
but,
top one you can share.
I can share one that is kind of up there. I sold quite a number of .ais in the $20,000 to $25,000 range, which is well above my, the price I normally sell names for. But within .ai, I quickly realized last year that I was selling them way too fast. They were just flying off the shelf. And then one of my friends, James Booth, he said, you're weak. You got to price them higher. You're ruining the market. You got to up the price. And I thought, he's probably right, because I'm just selling them way too fast and they're really hard to replace. I was selling them, I think, around $7,000 to $9,000. So at one point I repriced all of them to 19, and they just kept selling, basically. That's when I went through most of them, and I priced a whole bunch also much higher. So there's a few moonshots in there. But a lot of them are priced around 20, 25K. And I sold probably 5 or 6 in that range in the last 6 months. And one of them is Yuma.ai. So it's Juma. And the reason I picked this one to share is that it has an interesting backstory, because the company who bought it was originally called Team GPT, and they had a pretty domain name. I think they used team-gpt.com. So it was a hyphenated domain, but they also used the term GPT. And I think OpenAI, they sent them a notice that they had to change their name or they would take legal action or something like that. So the company rebranded as Yuma, and that's what they bought Yuma.ai for.
So just looking at their website, it says, comes from Swahili and Arabic, meaning Friday or day of gathering, but it looks like they're using it as, it's a marketing AI tool for marketing teams. So JU.
They came up with their own explanation why they thought it was a good brand. But I mean, the name has quite some meaning in different languages.
Well, and it's a pronounceable 4-letter, right? That's great. So they're saying it's short for just marketing. So JU.
Exactly. That's kind of a good example of why these type of short brandable names, they sell quite well, because companies can really give it their own identity, so to speak. That's a good example of a name I stocked up on quite a bit over the last 2 to 3 years. So in a sense, I told you at the beginning of this conversation that I kind of hit the brake on buying new names last year because we bought the house. But the only thing I luckily didn't do was stop buying .ai names. So I kept buying a handful of them like every month or so, which this year really paid off.
Right. I'm looking at Name Bio right now just to kind of get an idea on what these are going for in the wholesale market. And it's pretty hard to tell, right? Because Juma is pronounceable 4-letter, right? I mean, I guess here's one that's pronounceable it's hard to find exact. It looks like you can get for under $1,000, you can get a 4-letter .ai, but it's not as good, right? Is this one. So, the market is definitely, and then the ones that are good go up into the 4 figures.
Yeah, I'm not really, at the moment, I don't really buy .ai at auction. I think prices have been, they've become quite competitive, so to speak. Yeah. But I was lucky to be able to get a lot of them like 2-3 years ago also by just, either hand registering them or buying them at auction when they were still kind of flying under the radar.
You also are willing to disclose kind of one of your median sales, which is interestingly in .so. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, I picked that one to share because it's .so. I don't own too many, but I sold Flamingo.so for just under 4,000, which is really kind of like a bread and butter sale. So, I think you need to have plenty of names in your portfolio if you have a large portfolio within this price range, because those are the names, that kind of keep the cash flow and allow you to reinvest and, wait for, 1 or 2 of those outliers to hit every year. But what's interesting about this name is that...
Which is Somalia, for those that aren't familiar.
I think so, yeah. It's an extension that's it's... I don't think, for example, Afternic even supports the sale of them because you can't hold a .so at GoDaddy, for example. So if you sell them through Afternic, then it causes all sorts of trouble. As a result, we have lots of them listed with Efty because sellers, they look for alternative platforms to sell them through. But what we've seen over the years is that it's quite popular with startups, but also with indie makers. So just solo entrepreneurs who do projects and so on. But what's quite important here is that you got to price them to sell. So what we see is they sell really well 2, 3, 4K, 5K. Anything higher than that, you're already pricing out a lot of the people who would consider a name like that.
So let's talk about, because you do see a lot of data running Efty, which is a a platform for selling domains. It competes with a lot of the landing page services out there. You also have Efty Pay, which I'd like to get some more insight on. But what kind of things in general are you seeing right now overseeing the Efty platform?
Last year was a great year for Efty Pay, despite the fact that it's still mainly available for the sellers within our ecosystem. So we have a service called Efty Investor, which is our SaaS, which means you have to pay to use it. And Efty Investor allows you to use Efty Pay and put a Efty Pay buy it now button on your landing pages, on the marketplace, and so on. So it's still kind of like a walled garden, so to speak, where
it's limited. Yeah.
But despite that, we tripled our sales volume and revenue last year compared to the previous year. So that was quite promising.
On Efty Pay or overall on the platform?
On Efty Pay.
Okay.
So yeah. I'm purely looking at the transactions that we can track and that we control. We do have some data, of course, of users who use escrow API, for example, but that is not included. This is purely people who have used Efty Pay to sell the domain and let us handle the transaction.
Was 2025 the second year of Efty Pay, or was it third? Okay,
yeah,
second year.
Yeah, I mean, we launched it the year prior, so we took it, that was really our launch pad that year. But so we saw growth of almost 300%, which was great. And something that is quite important here is the partner API, because it now drives like 36% of total volume. Our partner API is integrator API that can be used by other marketplaces or even a registrar or other platforms. And that is powering quite a significant volume of the sales that go through the...
So they're off of they aren't on the Efty platform per se, on the SalesLander system. Then they're...
True.
Yeah.
They're through partners. And so that is very promising. Right now, our partner API only allows a marketplace to integrate it if someone is selling their own inventory. But next year, it will also open up for platforms who work with multiple sellers. So, for example, like a service like Efty who offers landing pages, they are now integrated with escrow.com. They can also offer Efty Pay to their users. So
that'll happen this year in 2026.
Yeah, that is going to open up before the end of this first quarter of the year. Yeah, I think another interesting fact, but not so surprising, is that 48% of all the Efty Pay sales were between 2,500 and 7,500. I think this is what most people know. That really is where the liquidity is for startups and SMEs, and so to speak. That's also where we saw pretty much half of the volume of sales. Then what was great to see is that we saw quite a big uptick in buy now transactions directly through the Efty.com marketplace, with transactions up to $50,000 from buyers who came directly to Efty.com and then searched for a domain there and just bought it directly through the marketplace.
Okay. So you're saying that they didn't just type it into their browser and go to a landing page. They actually found it through your market.
Yeah, so we sold quite a number of domains that were not even pointed to the platform, and that was great to see, especially with what is going to happen this year, because Efty has always been a subscription type of platform where you need like a monthly or annual subscription to use the service, but we're actually opening up the marketplace as a free service this year.
Interesting. So I'll be able to, even if I'm not paying a monthly fee and using the landing page system and all that sort of stuff, I could list my names in the marketplace.
Yeah, and we're actually rebuilding up the whole platform from scratch. We really have a really exciting year ahead. We went from just the two of us to now 4 people on the team, of which 3 people are pretty much focused on the technical side of the business. So we're building really hard behind the scenes. And so, really excited for what's ahead in the coming months.
Yeah. For people that aren't familiar with the system, it has been, you've been around for a while. This isn't brand new. In fact, when did you launch?
I don't know, but
the odds, more than right. It was in the.
Yeah, I don't think you can call us a startup anymore, but we've been active in the space for over 10 years. But we're really transforming from more like domain name management and sales platform into an actual aftermarket business this year, which is really exciting. Yeah.
Well, people can check that out. That's efty.com. Doron, congrats on your year. As you said, it wasn't your best year, but I think many people would be jealous of the results, especially on that strong sell-through rate. And I think, another thing to point out here is that you had 2 comm sales this past year, right? So even .vc, which you only have 70 of, you sold 3 there. So, I think, again, it shows that there's so much opportunity outside of .com. All right. Well, Doron, thanks so much for coming on the show again this week.
Thanks, Andrew.
My guest this week has been Doron Vermaat. He is a domain investor and also a co-founder of Efty. Again, go check that out at efty.com. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.